Go ahead.
Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting parents whose children have passed. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. Helping Parents Heal goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non dogmatic way. Helping Parents Heal affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non religious background, and encourage open dialogue. Attendance at this meeting is voluntary. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Discussions here are confidential and not designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Zoom meetings run by leadership are not confidential. These meetings typically feature guest presenters and are posted on YouTube so that affiliate members worldwide can watch and benefit. Neither type of Helping Parents Heal meeting is designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with our children who've passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you could join us this evening, and thank you, David, for being here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I'm going to read a short bio that you sent in as well. And I also just want to tell people that if you'd like to write in the chat box who you are, where you're from, if you're an affiliate leader, a caring listener, or a board member, please let us know so that we can recognize you. And this is going to be a really wonderful evening. I know that so many of you know and love David Kessler and know of grief.org. So let's go ahead and just read the bio first and then get started. David Kessler is one of the world's foremost experts on grief and loss. His experience with thousands of people on the edge of life and death has taught him the secrets to living a happy and fulfilled life even after life's tragedies. He is the author of 6 books, including the new best-selling book, Finding Meaning, The Sixth Stage of Grief. He co-authored 2 books with Elisabeth Kubler Ross, including On Grief and Grieving, updating her 5 stages of grief. His first book, The Needs of the Dying, received praise from Mother Teresa, who's now a saint as well. David's personal experience as a child witnessing a mass shooting while his mother was dying in a hospital helped him begin his journey. For most of his life, David has taught physicians, nurses, counselors, police, and first responders about the end of life, trauma, and grief. He facilitates talks, workshops, and retreats for those experiencing grief. However, despite his vast knowledge on grief, his life was turned upside down by the sudden death of his 21-year-old son. It inspired him to write his newest book, Finding Meaning. David's volunteer work includes being an LAPD Specialist Reserve for traumatic events, as well as having served on the Red Cross's Disaster Services team. He worked for over a decade in a 3-hospital system. He was trained for bioterrorists events as well as epidemics and pandemics. He is the founder of grief.com, which has over 5 million visits yearly from 167 countries. And without further ado, please join me, Irene, Lisa, and Rick in welcoming David Kessler. Welcome, David.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here with everyone. So thank you so much. I feel like that bio with all of us was like, yeah, there's so little we need to know about each other anymore. What connects us is our children these days. So thank you all so much for having me here.
That is true. It's the common denominator, and it's something that allows us to be able to find the people that really matter in our lives, I think. And
And by the way, it's 7 books now.
7 books. Wow, congratulations. So I guess the bio that I had was a little bit
It's a little bit old, but that's okay. That's
sorry
okay.
about that. But yes, this is a beautiful new workbook, as we were talking about. And I'd love to hear the inspiration for writing this. But I'd also love to hear a little bit about David, about your son. And when we were at the conference in 2022, you told us an incredible story about the signs that you were getting from David. It would be a lot of fun, especially for all of us here at Helping Parents Heal, to hear that story, which of course was recorded. And so some of us might have heard it, but could you tell a little bit more about that?
Sure. My younger son, David, was 21 years old. It was just the other day, 8 years ago. And I hit the 8-year mark. And, you know, for people who think, like, I don't know, it goes away, I don't know what crazy things they think. It's like 8 years is still like yesterday. And I think, you know, and I just want to say, I always hear Kubler Ross whispering, tell them the stages aren't linear and there's no one model and all that. So I always honor her by saying that. But I also thought about how acceptance goes on and on. Like I felt like I had to accept it's the 8th year. Like, oh, there's a whole nother layer of acceptance there. And it's interesting, I see sweet Dolores here. Dolores is one of our moderators. She moderates the Afterlife group in my online group, Tender Hearts, that I see some members from. Tender Hearts, we have like about 26 different groups, and we have a Afterlife group, and we have about 5 groups for parents who have had a child die. And I think Dolores was also at that event that I'm going to talk about years ago. When the first Finding Meaning book came out, David had died, and before it had come out, when I was just in the throes of grief, I had to go back to work, as all of us do. And I went to, well, first of all, let me say, we have these stories. David had a shirt that I was not a fan of, that was his favorite shirt. And he also, as children do, get attached to a shirt that they wear way too much. I didn't really dislike the shirt, but it was like enough with that shirt. And he wanted to wear it to everything. So it turns out when he died in that shirt. And when I was at his apartment with his girlfriend, dealing with his possessions, I said to her, if there's any, oh, Rachel's here too from Tender Hearts in the Grief Certificate Program. How sweet. Perfect. I love that. When I was there with his girlfriend, I said to her, without thinking things through, I said, if there's anything here you want, you're welcome to it. And she said, oh, I want the shirt. And I was like, oh, no, I wanted the shirt. So, but I had said, you can have anything. So I said, okay, must be meant to be with her. So she had the shirt. Then fast forward 1 year later, after his death, friends and family are gathered at the gravesite. And she walks up with the shirt. And by the way, this shirt, she walks up and she says, I'm going to put this shirt here. I'm not supposed to have it. And I can't tell you, I was like this. And I ran and grabbed that shirt. I almost knocked people down to get the shirt. I got the shirt. I packed it up in as many Ziploc bags as I could find because it still smelled like him. And I put it in a drawer. And I remember thinking, I put it away so I don't ever see it. What's the point? And then it started showing up at my lectures with people wearing it. Now, I was like, well, that's a coincidence. Someone's wearing the shirt. And then the next lecture, someone's wearing the shirt. And I'm like, well, these are big lectures with hundreds of people. Then one day I was at a small lecture, someone was wearing the shirt. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is going on, that the shirt, and like, no matter what would happen, I could find someone with that shirt. I said to someone who wore it, you're wearing the shirt. Oh my gosh, they didn't like it. They didn't like it. So I'm like, note to self, don't tell anyone who's wearing the shirt. So at one point, the book is coming out, the original book that's including my son in it. I can't tell you what a mess I was. I was pressured about the book's coming out and doing press around it. And I had this huge lecture in Los Angeles that Dolores was going to be at. And the pressure was on. And it's like, my son's in a book. You know, I've been doing this for decades. I did grief books about other people's loved ones, not my loved one wasn't supposed to be in the book. And so I'm doing this big event, which was stressful enough of a new book coming out, and we're doing the event. So I was under so much stress. Then I get a call from the LA Times saying we're sending someone. Then after that, I get a call that someone's coming from the Oprah Winfrey Network. I am like, could I have more pressure? Like, I don't know how much I can take, because like, I'm still, you know, in enormous pain. My son's in this book. It's my work. It's just was so confusing. I was learning how to handle all that. I start this event and I eventually told the story, and I said, and once again, someone's wearing his shirt at this event, which I think had maybe 300 people at it. I said, someone's wearing this shirt. On the next break, a woman comes up and says, hi, I'm from Oprah Winfrey Show. I'm the producer, da 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 da. And I'm like, okay, so nice to meet you. And she goes, I'm wearing the shirt, aren't I? And I go, why would you think you're wearing the shirt? And she goes, I know you said you don't tell anyone who's wearing the shirt, but here's the thing. I don't care about clothes. I just throw anything on and I leave the house. She said, I tried on 4 different shirts today. That's not like me. And I was like, she goes, whether you tell me or not, I know I'm wearing the shirt. And I'm like, yep, you're wearing the shirt. So, and I still get that at lectures today. Someone shows up with the shirt. It's kind of amazing. So that's the shirt story of David.
Well, from what I remember, there was someone at our conference in 2022.
Of course there was. Absolutely. Of course there was. Absolutely.
That was very exciting, and what a beautiful story. So obviously David follows you around and helps you out at all of these different events, and he's making sure that people who matter are seeing this book that he co-wrote with you, obviously. So I can't tell you how many people are affiliate leaders and caring listeners who have gone through your grief certification process.
Oh, yeah,
Irene has, obviously.
they're
Um,
amazing. I love all of you who have done that.
and we feel very grateful that you have done this. I also just want to say that I understand that the book itself is very complete, but you found a need to add a workbook to it. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about why you added this workbook.
Well, it's interesting that I'm seeing all of you today. I one of the things about a book called Finding Meaning, the sixth stage of grief, people had so many issues with the stages. So like there was that issue with it. And then people would say to me, finding meaning, I'm in too much pain to find meaning. And as much as I would say to people, the book isn't just about getting to the meaning, the book is about excavating the pain. And then as the book was out for a while, people go, okay, now we know the theories, but how do we like really get rid of the pain? And I said, I got to find a way to help people really deal with this pain. And one of the things that was so fascinating, you know, when we talked about this at the conference, I think the pain gets in the way of our connections with our children. So I'm really committed to helping people excavate that pain. So it was interesting, someone mentioned a workbook. And I said, and you all will appreciate this, I said to an advisor, good friend of mine, and I said to someone in the book world, I was thinking about doing a workbook. And both people had the same response. Do not do a workbook. It will kill your career. You can't be a serious author with a workbook. And I want you to imagine, you will get this. As a bereaved parent, I was like, is that all you got? Because that's about my ego. Oh my gosh. I would have to decide whether I'm dedicated to a literary career or dedicated to helping people. That's the easiest one I've had today. Oh my gosh, I want to help people. That is the point of me writing books. The point isn't to have a literary career, for goodness sakes. The point is to help people. So obviously, I decided to write the workbook. And, you know, so many of you who are here, either knowingly or not knowingly, were helping me see what works in Tender Hearts Online Grief Group or the certificate program or the lectures and all that. And I put together so many exercises in there. And here's the other thing about the book. We've all seen workbooks that are like, and you've seen books like this, that they say they're a workbook, and you look at them and they're like a quote with pages of lines. This is like a book. It's a book. It's a book with exercises. And you don't have to have read Finding Meaning. You can go right to this book. And I mean, the biggest chunk in it, no surprise, is guilt. I mean, there's pages and pages upon exercises of dealing with guilt and shame and how we tell our stories and old wounds and trauma. There's tons of exercises in there. So I really wanted it to be helpful to people, to be meaningful to people. And it is out now for pre-order. And I was also told, when I said, what's the reason, people said about the literary world? They said, well, first of all, people don't buy workbooks. So it's coming out in a few days, and as of right now, it's number 31 on Amazon. 31 in all the Amazon world. So much for what the literary world says about people don't buy workbooks. And I'm so grateful that it's there and it's available. And, you know, I would love your help too. We'll talk about how you can do that also today. I would love for you to help get the word out about it in any way you can. So
We will definitely do that. I would love to maybe do an exercise or two with you, with all of the parents. There's one here that I really like because I think that it's true when you're talking about guilt and self-judgment, and being able to forgive yourself.
what page you on, Elizabeth?
On page 58. And um, there's a question saying, what self-judgment about your healing or grief do you need to forgive yourself for? And on the other page, so you're figuring out what you're trying to forgive yourself for. I love this follow-up to it, which is, how would the kindest person you know tell you how to do that? So I think that that is something that is always important to realize, that these situations that we're going through, we are creating them a lot of times in our own minds, that we are feeling this guilt. The people around us don't want us to feel that way, especially the people who love us the most. So being able to think about, what would the kindest person that I know tell me about that?
And that kind of person doesn't have to be like a real life person. I mean, it could be Mother Teresa, it could be Oprah, it could be the Pope, it could be your great aunt, it could be anyone you think of. You know, and the other thing I want to say about judgment is, so many times people will talk to me about their grief, and they'll say, it's hard to release the pain when you're in so much judgment. And they'll go, I'm not judgment and judgment. Who am I judging? And I'll go, you're judging yourself. And they'll go, when am I judging myself? And I'll say, well, you're saying you should be further along in your grief. That's a judgment. Or you're saying you're backsliding in your grief. That's a judgment. You're crying too much. You're not crying enough. I mean, all of those things, you know, I always tell people we come from a long line of dead people. Like, every ancestor we've known has died, and our soul and psyche knows how to do this. It's the world out there that's telling us, no, you shouldn't be that way. You shouldn't feel this way. You should be over it by now. You should have moved on. All that stuff we hear. And we do that to ourselves sometimes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And
So
I'd just like to add something to that, David. I know that so many of us, and even though I'm now 11 years in my journey, guilt plays a major role across the board in every parent I have spoken to, under every circumstance of how their child crossed, how they passed. And I love this exercise when you're talking about making things right when you feel you've done wrong. And if you could just talk a little bit about, I think this is so fabulous.
Tell me the page you're on.
Page 66, the confabulation exercise. Yeah. I just love that.
So there's 4 big exercises I put in there, and I'll just walk you through those real quick. And I'm not going to do them justice as the workbook would, but just for the sake of time, confabulation is when we believe our own story. You know, if only I would have gotten my child to one more 12-step meeting, if only I would have called them, they wouldn't have died by suicide. I mean, I've had parents say to me, if only I wouldn't let them play. I'm like, what? You were going to stop your child from playing, but we do this, and here's why. Our mind would always rather feel guilty than helpless. It's how we find some control. And so our mind latches onto, oh, if only I didn't let them play, if only I didn't do this, if only I didn't do that, right? So that's what comes up. And the challenge isn't that those thoughts come up, we believe them, we repeat them. And that's the confabulation. We begin to believe our own stories. The next piece is what I talk about as proximal causation. Proximal causation is what happens before the death did not cause the death. We think what happened right before the death, oh, if only I had called them back, if we hadn't had that argument, if they had just gone to the doctor one more time, whatever it may be. We think what happened before the death caused the death. Then there's the scientific method I talk about. You remember your 5th grade science. And in your 5th grade science class, a theory wasn't true until you could prove it. And it had to be repeatable. It had to be repeatable. So think about this. If I was to drop this book, it doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove gravity. But if I dropped it in all the different cities in the world, does it prove gravity? No. All of you would have to prove it too. For something to be true in science, it had to be repeatable. By anyone who dropped a book, gravity would work. The same is true. Is it true that anyone who misses a 12-step meeting dies? No. Is it true that anyone who doesn't get a call back dies? No. So the workbook takes you through these different steps. And then we get to Occam's razor, which is the 4th piece. And Occam's razor talks about that idea of like, it probably wasn't the phone call, it was their mental illness. It says Occam's razor says the simplest answer is always the truest. I'm making this sound so technical. If you read it all in the workbook, it takes you through it. But Occam's razor says the simplest explanation is the truest. It was the mental illness. It was the addiction. It was a tragic accident. And so I put so much work into helping people go through the guilt to try to release it. The other piece I'd love to share with you is I have a disloyalty checklist. Think about this one. Have you ever felt disloyal when you find yourself laughing? If you have fun, need to make a big decision, trying something new, do something for yourself, forget something about the person that died, not think about them for an hour, not think about, I mean, it goes on, but like, hasn't every parent, like, we could fill out that checklist, right? So many things like that. And we don't realize, oh, that's actually about disloyalty. And disloyalty gets in the way of our healing.
It's fascinating. And I suppose that is true. And we all know that our kids just want us to be happy, healthy, and whole. They don't want us to be suffering. They don't want us to, they love to see us having fun, in fact. So it's something that's actually helping them instead of being disloyal. But it's very interesting that you bring that up. And
I see Sabrina says she believes her child died. She feels guilty because of a medical decision. You know, I promise when you do these exercises, it will take you through understanding that. And here's the thing that's amazing to me, and probably many of you have seen this, is to identify what the lie is. I got to tell you, and this is just for people who had a medical illness, I worked for a year in a 3-hospital system. And here's the thing I saw that always perplexed me. There were people who showed up for their appointments early. They researched everything. They knew what medications they were taking. They had reminders. They took it all. They did all the treatments. They did everything right. And they still died. Then there was someone else who didn't show for their appointments. We kept telling them if they don't take their treatment, they're going to shorten their lives. They didn't, they made the most horrible medical decisions. And guess what? We couldn't kill them. We couldn't kill them. So it's an illusion that if we had just gotten the decision right, they would be here. And I hope for those of you who are in that pain that you will look at this book and see if it doesn't give you some relief from that. Because I can tell you, it wasn't your fault. And your medical decision is not why they died. And it's interesting, one of the questions the book asks is, how committed are you to the story of guilt? You know, how committed are you? And I say this when I work with people, are you willing to open the door to just the possibility that there could be another reason they died besides your fault?
Yes. So Katerina is saying the most helpful message I've gotten from David regarding guilt is to say, and they still could have died regardless of my reason to blame myself. So exactly.
And the workbook takes you through, you write down the what if I had made the other decision, and then it eventually takes you down to even if you had made the other decision, they would have died. So it takes you from the what if to the even if. And I hope it does it gently and lovingly. That was my intent.
That's wonderful. Well, I think that it's so interesting for us to be able to be exploring this with you because you have such an enormous reach. You're, I guess, now in 167 countries. And I guess as I was reading, but it might not even be as many as you have now, 5 million visits a year on your grief.org. So you are dealing with things that I think are happening every day. You get calls from different groups that need you to come right away to be able to address different issues. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that is that you get called so often to talk about this throughout the world, not just here in the States, but in other areas of the countries or other countries as well.
You know, look, I wish I could take credit for something around that. I mean, I think I'm blessed because Mother Teresa helped put me on the map. I mean, Elisabeth Kubler Ross helped put me on the map. I mean, those people really, I mean, because listen, so many people have written incredible books, better books than mine, probably. And, you know, it just is what it is. I don't like to feel like I've done anything that special. I just, you know, this has been my dedication since my own mother died. I mean, I grew up in a childhood with my mother dying, and many of you know it was one of the first mass shootings. I grew up with a childhood of understanding the brutality of the parent-child connection being severed. I mean, that's why I got into this work. And, you know, now I'm on the other side of it as a bereaved parent. And I just, you know, I say yes to everything I can and do everything I can. You know, Tender Hearts and my work online just came out of, you know, it was in, some of you remember this, it just came during the pandemic. I was sitting at home, my lectures were canceled, And I woke up and I'm like, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to go online twice a day. And I just decided to go online twice a day. Like, let me talk to everyone who doesn't have a grief group and let's get together. And, that became Tender Hearts. And it's, we've got a 5 p.m. for the folks in Australia, and we've got early morning for the UK and midday. And, it's really touched me. And it just shows how universal grief is. And I love that, Tender Hearts, not only do we have 26 grief groups, but even though I charge a small monthly fee, it's $34, no one's ever turned away for a lack of funds. I mean, if anyone needs to be in that group, I'm committed. You don't have $34, no problem, you're in grief. I want to get you in. And it's just is so important to do that to me. So I think, like I said, I couldn't tell you why I get the calls, but I just answer the phone, and that makes the difference, I think.
That's wonderful. And I also just want to say that you were speaking about the fact that this grief certification program that you have is available to our affiliate leaders and to our caring listeners as well, which is very, very kind of you. I know that many of them have already completed it, but it's a wonderful tool for them to be able to use to move forward and help the parents in our group as well.
And that's the thing that, I feel that's what makes this so meaningful, that I can do that for people. So I love being able to help and it's interesting, those things that, like they said, I remember someone said to me, well, if you start this grief educator program, I mean, doesn't it take away from you if other people can use your name and say they were trained by you? And I'm like, please, we got to help everyone in the world. Like, there's silliness too. There's a lot of competitiveness in this world. And that's just, I mean, as bereaved parents, we're done with those games. We're just done with that. Like, what's a winner anymore? I mean, gosh, I'm just grateful to do this work. And, that's really my meaning. And I know I've told this story to many of you that, David, when he was in kindergarten, got an award for the most likely to be a helper. And he didn't get to do that in his life. And I hope that in some ways he's getting to help me help others, and he's getting to be a helper in death in a way that he couldn't do in life.
I'm sure he's very, very proud of you. And I think that maybe Irene would like to announce the exciting news as well that we were just talking about earlier, or maybe not. I don't know. Did you want to say
Well,
something?
we'll put David on the spot if we say it, but as long as he's okay. David has agreed to come and come back and speak at the next Helping Parents Heal Conference in 2026. Yeah.
Of course, just make sure you email me those dates right away.
Yes, yes, we will. And
Yes.
David,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
okay, I'll tell you the page number, but page 47. If you could talk a little bit about the 6th stage of grief, acceptance and beyond. I mean, I just think that's so beautiful. And for so many of us, that's a turning point, the acceptance and where we go from there.
Yeah, look, after David died for me, I was like, I'm supposed to accept this? That's it? I'm just supposed to accept it? Like, okay, he died. I just accept that? No way. No way. And I just knew there had to be more. And I read Viktor Frankl's work again, Man's Search for Meaning, and I was like, and I knew sometimes people in grief weren't crazy about meaning, and I didn't understand why. And I started writing about it and researching it, and I found that, people often think the meaning is in the death. They'll go, there's no meaning in a child dying from a horrible illness. There's no meaning in a child being murdered. There's no meaning in all these horrible ways we die in this world? And I'll go, of course not. Of course not. Meaning is in us. It's what we do after. And the other thing that's so important is people go, oh, meaning what? I'm supposed to start a charity? And I go, no, meaning is found in the moments. Like so many of you, no other parents here. If I can say one thing that's helpful, and you can maybe tell another parent, that makes this a meaningful moment. Just being with all of you tonight is so meaningful to me. I think we just need to name those moments. And so that's how the idea of the meaning came about, finding meaning and not sort of stopping at acceptance. And then, of course, the publisher wanted it to be the 6th stage of grief. And, the Kubler Ross family was so gracious to allow me to do that. And it was one more way for me to say to everyone, the stages aren't linear, stop. There's no 5 easy steps to grief.
Well, we just had Ken Ross on a couple months ago, and he was talking about his amazing mom, and then also about the 5 stages of dying. And it's so interesting because when Elisabeth Kubler Ross wrote that chapter, it was back in the late 1960s, and she didn't have a firm grip on English, and she was just trying to let people know, even for dying, that these are stages that people can actually go through, but they don't necessarily go through them. So it was just an identifying mark for people, and I think it's the same for these in terms of grief, that it's just something that you could experience, but you don't necessarily experience. And the most important one to experience is this one, finding meaning.
I'll tell you, it's all about excavating the pain. So if anyone's like, I don't want to find meaning, it's fine. Just lighten up, not lighten up, but find some lightness. And, people are often afraid if I release the pain, I'm going to lose the connection to my child. And I always say, as we release the pain, we can find out we're always going to be connected in love. We don't have to be connected in the pain. So anything I can do to ever help anyone get through some of the pain, I think is so important.
That's beautiful. And it's true. Being able to get through that pain is where you do get that better connection with your child. And um, so it's wonderful that you're able to do that with all of the students that you have, again, throughout the United States and throughout the world as well.
And we
And
have a thing at griefbook.com. If you pre-order the book, which I would love you to do that, because I would love to show the world that a workbook can be meaningful, and a bereaved parent's book can be meaningful, and a bestseller and all that. I'm so grateful it's already doing well. But if you do pre-order it, you can go to griefbook.com and you can get it from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your independent bookstore. Griefbook.com. When you get the book, I'm going to have a free 3-week class going through some of the exercises in the book. So you can buy it anywhere you want, and then just go to griefbook.com, and I'd love to have you in that class, and we'll go through it and try to release a little pain together. And by the way, the other kind of horrible thing in the book world, this is the book. There's, I don't know how to call them, counterfeit books, people that write workbooks out there that, like, literally some of the questions in their workbook doesn't even have anything about grief. They have AI that does them, and they just put them out quickly on any book that's a bestseller, and they say it's the workbook for it. This is the only workbook for it, so please get the one that's teal with the sunrise.
so, yes, this one right here. and it's beautiful. And I want to just say, this is so beautiful what Kathy's writing. She's saying, I did really appreciate your acknowledgement that if you don't have to found a charity in your child's name, but that you can honor your child in simple everyday moments. If I had just made someone uh, smile, then I feel like I've honored my child. But there are also those who do that kind of thing. So it is important to realize that you don't have to do anything really monumental, but just being able to make someone else smile is such a big deal. So thank you, Kathy, and thank you, David. Um, let's see. Oh, Margaret is saying, be careful that the book you purchase is authentic. So are there other books that look teal that are out there right now that are being sold?
By design. By design. That's why if you go to griefbook.com and then go to the Amazon link or the Barnes and Noble link or the bookshop.org link, that for sure is the real one. Or if you've got your Amazon, just make sure you go to that one. And just know, or you can go to grief.com. Yeah, someone said they went to grief.com. It's right on the top. That takes you to the true Amazon link.
Rachel is saying, I submitted my pre-order and got the registration for the 3-week series today. So it sounds like as soon as you pre-order the book, your series will be available for parents.
Then it's not out yet because we're gonna do it when you've got the book in your hand.
Right, right. But that's wonderful. So if you've done that and gotten that, then sounds like you're on the right track. You've ordered the right one, which is good.
I would say for anyone here who's just deep in the throes of pain around this, and you're like, please, with the meaning stuff and the hope stuff, I get it. I get it. I didn't want to hear about it either. I don't know that if anyone's there. But just know, I try to tell people, no feeling is final. They all change. They all change. And, we're never forgetting our kids. We're never forgetting our kids. Katrina says, it's available October 1st. When can we expect it? If you pre-order it now, it will arrive at your door October 1st. So, and pre-orders make all the difference in the world. So if anyone can pre-order it now, that would be really appreciated.
It will prove to everyone that workbooks are important, right?
And especially grief books. Grief books. I mean, many of you have had grief books. It's like people are like, ugh, grief books. And it's like, yeah, you say, ugh, grief books while your loved ones are alive. Talk to me after they're gone,
Well, it was very meaningful for us to be able to have you speak at the conference after David had transitioned, and
Yeah,
you
me too.
were very eloquent in telling us the way that you had spoken to parents in the past, and how that way of speaking changed after you had David transition. Maybe you could just say a little bit about that, because it was so interesting to me to hear that.
Well, I've been lecturing for parents for decades. And first of all, when I get that call, as so many of you know, I literally got on the floor. I fell to the floor. I wasn't sure if I was going to get up. And I eventually, I canceled everything, lectures and everything I was doing. And I had written, 5 books at that point on grief and loss. And I eventually realized I have to do the stuff that I've been telling people to do. I have to go to a grief counselor, and I have to go to a bereaved parents group. And I have to tell you, it took me probably 3 times before I could walk in the door of the bereaved parents group. And I got in the group and I had a cap on and I had my contacts out and I had glasses on. And I had to sit 5 feet away from a table with my books on it. And I couldn't say to anyone, oh, that's me, I'm the grief expert. I had to be the father that buried a child. And I thought, am I going to learn everything I've been doing has been wrong? Because as many of you have probably said these words, I was someone for decades that parents had said to me, oh, you're a grief expert. Oh, you got degrees, you got books, da da da. Have you buried a child? Have you had a child die? And I would go, no. And they'd go, yeah, don't want to talk to you. And I'd be like, okay, find whoever is the person for you. So I wondered, am I going to learn any new tools or techniques that I didn't know before? And I didn't learn anything, but here's what did change. I wanted to write every parent I'd ever counseled a note telling them I didn't get how bad the pain was. I didn't get how bad the pain was. I don't think you get it till you know it. As much as we'd like other people to understand it, even I, as the grief expert, didn't get it.
It's so beautifully said. And you said the same thing at the conference. And I just think that that's it's almost impossible to go to someone who is helping us heal if they haven't gone through the same thing, because we're this big family.
Right.
We all understand. We all love talking about our kids. We all love being able to hear about other people's kids as well. But people who haven't gone through it don't necessarily get it. And I think it's just hearing you say that and seeing the emotion when you say that you just didn't get it. It means the world to all of us, I think, because you are the
And I'll
world's.
tell you, this year, I was at David's grave and I left his grave. I got in my car and my phone rang, and it was a friend, a pretty good friend, who said, hey, what are you up to? And I, without thinking, said, oh, just coming from David's grave. And he went, still? And I went, yep, still. I'm sure I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. What are you doing this morning? And I know, to my friend, he's had to bury his parents. He had, he's got different feelings about it. He hasn't had to deal with this. So, yep, still.
And our
Yep.
kids are going to be with us for the rest of our lives, and they will be there first thing when we transition as well. And
Well, that's my thing when people say, how long is, my sister's child died, my loved one's child died, how long are they going to grieve? I'm like, well, how long is the child going to be dead? The child's going to be dead a long time. You're going to grieve a long time. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I'm like,
no,
oh.
you're right. We're going to be healing for the rest of our lives, and I think that it's so good to be with people who understand. That I think that you have to find your tribe, find the people who understand, because not all of our good friends, and certainly not all of our family either, understand that it is something that we like to talk about, even 8 years later, even 15 years later. We still like talking about our kids because for us, they're still a huge part of our lives, and they always will be. But I am so thrilled that you were able to come on here, and I know that Irene feels the same way. Irene, do you have any other questions for David? But I thought maybe you could sum up the book, because we haven't been able to talk about the book maybe as much as we need to. But one thing I did see is that Carol, who's one of our affiliate leaders in Australia, said that the pre-order is not available there. But
Not available there yet. No.
But it might be later. Is it?
I'm hoping it goes to Australia. The other thing I wanted to just mention, my definition of healing. Because I know people get scared that healing can feel like forgetting. And to me, healing is when their death no longer controls us. And I don't want to be controlled by the pain. I want to be inspired by my son. And I think the pain can control us. And I'd rather be inspired than controlled. And the last thing I want to tell you that I put in here, it's a little hard to see, but many of us know the hero's journey. If you don't know the hero's journey, so many movies you've watched are about the hero's journey, from Star Wars to Hunger Games to Marvel, DC Comics, all of them. And I did the hero's journey in the book. And in the beginning of the hero's journey, I did one for Star Wars. Luke Skywalker's parents dies. There's always a death at the beginning of the hero's journey. And then you go into the dark night. And I have a whole diagram that I hope parents will do their journey on, to realize you're on a hero's journey too. And you know, my Tender Heart group, the subtitle is called A Community of Courageous Grievers. I gotta tell you, I think people in grief and who are dealing with this loss are some of the bravest people in the world. They're some of the most courageous people you're ever going to meet. So that's what inspires it for me.
I love the fact that you call us all heroes. And
You are.
but I think the biggest heroes are our kids in spirit who
Yeah,
are
that's true.
guiding
That's true.
on this hero's journey. And I am so grateful that you were able to meet with us this evening. And I know that Irene would love to say some words as well. And
Oh, just thank you. This is great. Thank you very much. Get the workbook. Oh, let me see if I can. Here it is. It's a great workbook. I did some of the exercises today and I really enjoyed it. So thank you, David.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing all of you.
yes, so we'll be seeing you in 2026, if not before, if you'd like to come back. And hopefully Paul will be able to come back with grief yoga as well, which was also a huge hit. So anyway, we always ask everyone to say thank you and good evening. So
Yes, please unmute.
unmuted. So if you'd like to go ahead and do so. And thanks for being here, Lisa. And Rick, too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Beautiful
Good night,
session.
everybody.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you,
It was
David.
wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Wonderful evening. See you on
Bye.
Thursday, everyone. If
Bye-bye.
not,
Thank you.
Wednesday has some meetings too. Anyway, talk to you
Yeah.
soon. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye,
Thank you.